Hey guys, it's Bella and welcome back to another episode of Mystery Monday. As always, make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you want more Mystery Mondays, want me to continue the series. But before we get started, I just want to mention I always get a million questions about the makeup that I'm wearing in these videos. I actually recorded this as a tutorial. I'm not sure if it will be up yet. But if it's not up yet, I will link it in the description box when it is up. If it is already up, then it's gonna be in the description box already. So just check down there, and if it's not, then just check my channel in a few days. So let's just go ahead and get into today's video. So today we're gonna be talking about the murder of Jill Dando. Jill Dando was an English TV presenter, newsreader, and journalist, and at the time of her death, she was a TV presenter on the very popular show called Crime Watch, which was shown on BBC.
Britain's most important unsolved cases. Now live, you can help solve them.
Unfortunately, on April the 26th in 1999, Jill, at 37 years of age, was shot in the head outside of her home in Fulham, London. So on the morning of the 26th, the morning that Jill was shot, she was staying at her fiance's house, Alan Farthing, in Chiswick, and at that morning she decided to go home to her home in Fulham, London. Normally she didn't really visit it that often because she was in the process of selling it, but on the 26th she decided to go home, visit it, check out the house, make sure everything was okay. She arrived at about 11:32 a.m. and was preparing to unlock the front door of her house when she was grabbed from behind with the killer's right arm and forced to the ground so much that her face was like almost pressing on the ground. With his left arm, he shot her in the left temple with a 9mm automatic pistol, killing her instantly. 14 minutes after the shooting, Jill's neighbor, Helen Noble, noticed her body and called the police immediately at 11:47 a.m. Her body was then taken to Charing Cross Hospital, where she was declared dead on arrival at 1:03 p.m. Another one of Jill's neighbors, Richard Hughes, claims that he heard Jill exclaim, kind of in the same way that you would exclaim if you saw like an older friend or something like that, but he did not hear a gunshot. Richard also mentioned seeing a man who he thought could have been the killer, but at the time he didn't even realize that it would have been a killer because he didn't know what happened. So he thinks he saw a man leaving the scene through his front window who was about 6 foot tall. He was around 40 years old and a middle-aged white man. Despite the fact that Jill was such a massive public figure and people like everywhere knew who she was, the fact that police had spoken to over 2,500 people and taken 1,000 statements within the first 6 months, they still came up empty-handed and had no leads as to who had done this. There were just so many places to look. Jill had been in contact with so many people. She had millions of people who knew who she was. There was just so many places to look, which could have made the case a lot harder because you don't have like, you know, specific leads and nothing at the crime scene. There was no DNA or anything left, so it was really hard to like figure out who exactly would want to do this because she was a presenter on the TV show Crime Watch. So obviously there could have been a few people who like were mad about that fact. After a year of investigations, police just had nothing. They became really desperate, so they decided to focus all of their attention on a man named Barry George because he lived in Fulham and he had a history of sexually assaulting and harassing women. It became clear that police were just going after Barry because he was an easy target. He had an IQ of 75, which is well below average. He also had epilepsy and they described him as being a little bit slow as well. The police on record stated that his eyebrows meet, teeth broken, talks with a lisp, simple. They showed that they were aware of his vulnerability and that he was someone who could easily incriminate himself or could be trapped easily, which is why police, because they were so desperate, decided to use an attractive female officer to honey trap Barry George, despite the fact that honey traps had been discredited in a case in 1992. And a honey trap is basically where they use an attractive person to get information out of a person or get the person to do something unwise or incriminate themselves. So the conversation between Barry and the attractive female officer who they named Sonia, I believe, it wasn't her real name, but they just used that name. The conversation lasted an hour, and during the conversation, Barry admitted that they were actually looking at him for the murders. He also stated that he was in trouble, that they came to his house, they were searching for anything they could find through his house and basically tearing his place apart, all because he lived in Fulham. Barry even mentioned to the lady that he was trying to help the police by mentioning a car that he had seen surveying the area in the days leading up to Jill's murder. And although the honey trap didn't give police any leads at all, it did help them pin him as a loner, as attention seeking, and as antisocial. All of which would help them in a situation were he to go in front of a jury. So Barry was arrested on the 25th of May, and then on the 28th of May he was charged with Jill's murder. During Barry's trial, his defense argued that the scene was so meticulously planned, that the crime was meticulously planned and so thorough that Barry wasn't actually capable of committing such a murder and going through with such a meticulous plan to kill this woman for no reason. But on the 2nd of July in 2001, Barry George was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Jill Dando. Obviously, the case against George didn't have much weight at all, so they actually appealed it 3 times. The first 2 times were obviously unsuccessful, but on the 3rd appeal it was successful and they were able to get another trial for Barry. So basically the 3rd appeal, which was approved in November of 2007 after he'd already spent so long in jail, was approved because the evidence, which was like the tiniest little piece, like minute amount of gunpowder found in one of Barry's pant pockets, was discredited. So then a second trial took place, which took 8 weeks, and on the 1st of August in 2008, Barry George was acquitted.
After more than 8 years in prison, Barry George is a free man, cleared of the murder of TV presenter Jill Dando. Mr. George's family have campaigned tirelessly for his release.
As strange it might seem to most, for her family, because obviously they have been wronged, and you know, they've not been, well, I believe, although I can't be positive, that they've not been told all the truth of the matter of what's happened. They've been probably deceived a little.
Honestly, to me, it's clear that Barry did not commit this murder, so that still leaves this case wide open for speculation, and obviously there have been some theories about what happened to Jill, who murdered her, and how it happened. So the first theory is that Jill was murdered by a professional hitman. Firstly, Jill was shot with a single bullet to the head in broad daylight, and no one saw anything. There are no witnesses, no one coming forward with any description of who this guy was, and the neighbors did not even hear a bullet. And on top of that, the killer managed to leave without a single trace of DNA anywhere, nothing to link anyone to this crime, which is why they went after Barry George with no DNA evidence, just no evidence at all basically. There is nothing, no evidence surrounding this case. Just everything about this murder points to a professional hitman, because everything seems to have been so well planned and just executed so well. I mean, not well because it's a murder, but like for a murder, it was executed really, really well. There was a report to the police which actually named 2 men from one of England's most notorious crime families. They said that Jill was most likely being targeted for her role in presenting crime on television, which is what I stated before actually, where I thought that the fact that she was on Crime Watch definitely might have had something to do with it. There was an unidentified hitman who told Thomas Williams, who was a journalist and a former cop, that he knows who actually committed the murders. He says that it was definitely a hitman, and he won't say it out of fear for his own life because he thinks that this other hitman will kill him. And the man, who is a hitman himself, says that this was definitely a murder committed by a hitman or a professional. And to further this theory, the ex-boss of the flying squad, and a flying squad, if you guys don't know what that is, I think it was also known as the robbery squad. It was just basically like this it was like a branch of the police force, and they were like really mobile and able to get to crime scenes really, really fast and basically just get to incidents really, really quickly. So the guy that used to be the boss, John O'Connor, he says that he also believes that this was a professional murder. John O'Connor specifically believes that this was a state-sponsored murder. He also mentioned that he had an excellent lead and the police just ignored it. Once they decided to focus on Barry George, they pretty much just ignored every other lead, every other bit of information that they got. Even if they had good information, they just ignored it and they just focused all of their efforts and all of their energy onto Barry George. And then once he was sentenced to life imprisonment for it, I guess they were just like, that's it, case closed. So nothing was really done. So John stated that state-sponsored murders are super notorious, but they're very, very hard to prove. I mean, because obviously they use very highly trained assassins, and if it is a state-sponsored murder, they need someone who is so highly trained that they're not going to leave behind any trace. So I guess it makes sense in that regard. And what I said before, actually, John stated that once they focused on Barry, that was just it. He knew all of the charges against Barry were complete nonsense, but they just kept going against them and just ignored everything that he said. So the next theory is that this was a hit which was taken out by the Serbian mafia as revenge against Jill. Detectives actually received a lead which said that Serbian mobsters were in a bar talking about the assassination of Jill. And they claimed that the Serbian mob wanted to execute this murder because Jill had reported on a NATO-led bombing of a Serbian TV station. So in the report to the police, or a phone call that the police got, they said that one of the guys from the Serbian mafia, which was seen discussing this case, discussing the execution of Jill in the bar, was a tall man with a swallow tattoo on his neck. There was even a call which was made to BBC 3 days later, and it contained a threat against Anne Robinson and Alice Beer, who starred in the show Watch Dogs. They said something like, "From Serbia, we're going to kill Anne Robinson and Alice Beer and 2 others." Police did manage to trace this call to a location. It was Gerrards Cross in Buckinghamshire, but after that they couldn't trace who had made the call, where exactly they were, and for all they know, by the time they got there, the person who had made the call was gone, so they couldn't track anything further, and it was basically a dead lead. In addition to this theory, Jill had 3 weeks before her murder fronted a TV appeal from Kosovan and Albanian refugees, and apparently this was said to have enraged the Serbian mafia. And on top of this, 4 Serbians are currently on trial for a very, very similar murder, the murder of Slavko Karuvia. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I will have the name on the screen so you guys can read it yourselves. He was a journalist and a critique of the Serbian regime, and he was also shot out front of his home, point blank range, 15 days before Jill. So that's pretty suspect to me, but of course there are more theories. There are so many theories in this murder, and the thing about them is they all seem extremely plausible. So the next theory is that this is an IRA revenge killing. So Barry George's legal team had some files which revealed that a convicted killer, Wayne Aird, wrote a letter from prison stating that he was part of a 4-man hit squad that carried out the murder of Jill. The letter was sent from his jail cell at Wakefield Prison, where he was in prison for killing someone just 2 months after Jill's murder. He basically said that a member of this little hit squad, one of the 4 men, shot her in the head with a 9mm bullet before escaping into a Land Rover to a safe house. He also stated that the only reason he was confessing was because he didn't want Barry George to be part of an establishment cover-up. And he also mentioned that the reason she was targeted was because of her links to police in presenting on Crime Watch. Apparently the reason they were able to get away with this murder was because they didn't want to disturb the Northern Ireland peace process. And even though police knew of these letters, they didn't investigate further, which is very suspect to me. I mean, if they did want to avoid harming the peace process, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that the police would try and cover this up. So, I mean, what he's saying makes sense. I feel like all of these theories just make so much sense. The next theory is that a crazed fan was the one who committed the murder. Apparently, in the year before Jill was murdered, she was being harassed by this like crazy fan who had just been stalking her. In the week that Jill was murdered, she appeared on a cover, the cover of Radio Times magazine, which was so weird to me, but they considered this provocative. When I was reading about this, everywhere said that this was a provocative photo shoot. So I looked it up, and to me, this does not seem at all like a provocative photo shoot. Like, it's just crazy how times change. But they say that the fact that this provocative photo shoot came out might have tipped this crazy fan off the edge, or tipped one of her crazy fans over the edge, and that basically made them murder her, I guess. The only thing that I find stupid about this is I do agree that this seems like a professional murdered Jill. Like, I just, like, everything about it, like no DNA, just everything about the murder seems like a professional took it out, so I just feel like it wouldn't have been a crazed fan considering all of the evidence. There is another theory which I wasn't going to mention because I could not find much information at all, but I just thought better to give you all of the theories now instead of not giving you all of the theories, I guess. Basically, some people believe that there was a hitman named Joe from Spain who committed these murders. A report from the National Crime Intelligence Service said that this guy could be linked to the murders. He had been linked to other murders, and he was described as a frustrated gangster who owed money to a guy named Penny Noy, I believe you pronounce it. And apparently he traveled all the way to the UK from Spain. I guess that's not all the way, but he traveled from Spain to the UK just to commit this murder, just so that he could rehabilitate his reputation with all of the other gangsters, I guess. But Joe was never traced, so that's where the lead ends. There wasn't a lot of info on it, so I just thought I wouldn't mention it. But which brings us to the last theory, that Jill was murdered for trying to expose a pedophile ring. In 2014, a colleague stated that Jill actually tried to talk to some BBC bosses and raise concerns about allegations that she had heard. So she tried to raise her concerns about an alleged pedophile ring at the organization just a few months before her death. Apparently she passed a file about the pedophile ring to senior management in 1990, but no one really took any notice of it. No one wanted to know. There was never an investigation carried out about it. So Jill had also told her colleague that other women had come up to Jill and told her, complained about sexual assaults. Some even claimed to have been groped or sexually assaulted. And although they spoke to Jill, they never spoke to anyone else. They never came forward about it because they were scared that they would lose their jobs. Nothing was ever done, even though Jill was trying to warn people and, you know, bring the situation to light. Her colleague said that there seemed to be kind of a policy that everyone had to turn a blind eye to this. And apparently people that Jill was implicating in the crime were well-known figures, which would make sense why people were turning a blind eye. So that brings us to the end of today's video. I honestly have no idea which theory I believe. All I know is that a hitman for sure was the one to carry out this crime. It was just too perfect, you know what I mean? There was no DNA evidence, no one saw the guy, no one knows who it was. There was just nothing linking anyone specifically to this crime. So I definitely think it was taken out by a professional, but I have no idea which theory I believe. Let me know what theory you guys think is the most logical, which one you think happened. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I really hope you enjoyed this. Make sure you give it a thumbs up for me, subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!